I'll give folks a chance to get settled. I first want to say welcome to Albany Law School and welcome to the 10th annual Katheryn Katz Memorial Lecture. I want to welcome everyone in the room, and we also have a ton of people online, so thank you to everybody who is online and joining us by Zoom today. I'm really honored to be here this evening and have the opportunity to welcome you. This is my second annual Katheryn Katz Lecture that I get to be part of, and I can already tell you how important this is and how meaningful this is to all of us and to me included. So the Katz Lecture Series is one of the law school's truly most important programs and traditions. It is one of Albany Law School's cornerstone events, in key part because it is an event, excuse me, dedicated to advancing conversation on really critical questions of social justice, including topics ranging from domestic violence, gender in the law, children in the law, reproductive rights, and inequality. The range of topics that we have explored through the Katz Lecture Series includes a growing list of very pressing family law topics, ones that we know are only growing over time. And the conversations that we have here contribute to and really help to advance thinking and work on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in some of these critical questions. The Katz series really is a powerful reflection of Albany Law School's commitment to advancing equity and social change in the world. And it is this legacy and this commitment that allows us to attract the incredible caliber of speakers that we have had over the years, including tonight's keynote speaker, Professor Martin Guggenheim, who we are so happy to welcome. Professor Guggenheim is the Fiorello LaGuardia Professor of Clinical Law Emeritus at NYU Law School. He's a nationally renowned scholar, litigator, award-winning teacher, and author in the area of children's rights and family law. It really would be nearly impossible to imagine welcoming someone who has more expertise and more experience on questions related to children in the law. So again, welcome Professor Guggenheim, and thank you for coming to speak to our community. It really does mean a lot to us. And now, before turning the floor over to Professor Melissa Brieger, I want to take just a moment to honor our friend, Katheryn Katz. Although I did not have the privilege to know Kathy personally, I've heard a lot. And I do know that she left a very powerful legacy as a faculty member, as a teacher, and as a very passionate and effective advocate. It really is evident from everything that I've learned about Kathy that she was a true cornerstone of the Albany law community, and definitely an absolute favorite amongst our students, the faculty, and so many people beyond these walls. Honoring Kathy's legacy, this lecture series really has advanced conversations around some of the most pressing social justice issues of our time. And now tonight, we get to further those conversations through Professor Guggenheim's conversation and critique on the child welfare system. And our distinguished speakers over the years have been the same kinds of field leaders that Kathy was and Professor Guggenheim is. Some come from our very own faculty, our outstanding faculty, including Professor Melissa Brieger, Professor Mary Lynch, Professor Stephen Clark. The list also includes our former professor and now dean at Toronto Metropolitan University School of Law, Donna Young. But we have also welcomed powerhouses in the field from outside the law school, including Professor Kimberly Mutcherson, Professor Kristen Henning, Dean Rachel Ray Boucher, and last year, Professor Jane Spinak, a really, truly remarkable group. Now, finally, I did just want to say a special thanks because this event really is only possible both financially, but also just in terms of overall support and enthusiasm and commitment. And that's due to one of our school's great friends, Miss Betsy Katz, who I'm looking at on the screen here, and the entire Katz family. So Betsy couldn't be here with us today in person, but she's definitely here both on the screen and in spirit, I know. So Betsy, I'm going to look at you and not the crowd for a moment. I just want to say thank you. We're really thrilled that we get to take the time each year to remember your mother and the impact that she made and continues to make on our community and beyond. And additionally, I want to say thank you for your enduring support and commitment to Albany Law School. I'm really so pleased to have had the chance to meet you and get to know you, and so pleased that we have the opportunity to celebrate your mom's amazing legacy together. So thank you for all you do for Albany Law School and for making tonight possible and so special. So a special thanks, Kathy.
Thank you.
And now it's my pleasure to welcome up one of my favorite people and someone who is in their own right a true cornerstone of the Albany law community and who has shaped the lives, the careers, and the success of so many of our past and present students, many of whom are probably in the room or online. So with that, I'm going to welcome Professor Melissa Brieger up.
Oh, thank you so much for those kind words and introduction, Dean Carlarn. And I'd like to echo your welcome to the audience, everybody on Zoom, and I see two of Betsy Katz's, great. And want to welcome everybody here in the room. Thank you for being here, and thank you, Professor Guggenheim, for being here. I'm honored to tell you a little more about the wonderful event and the legacy of Professor Katheryn Katz. You heard a bit from our dean about the genesis of the lecture series and about Professor Katz. She was only the second female law professor at Albany Law School. She was beloved for her dedication and service to the school and to her law students. She was respected for her important and thought-provoking scholarship. She was greatly admired for her innovative teaching. And in fact, among her many crowning achievements was the development of the very first domestic violence seminar in the United States in 1986. And Professor Lynch and I wrote a law review article highlighting that fact. Professor Katz served as a mentor for so many of us in this room, many online, myself included. She's been sorely missed by all of us. There are so many times in class or at a faculty meeting when we think aloud, what would Kathy do? In addition to being a scholar, a teacher, a mentor, and a leader in her field, Professor Katz was a proud mother and grandmother. Betsy is unfortunately down with a sinus infection today, but is always here in the audience and is here on Zoom today. Betsy and Michael and his family all adored their mom beyond words. When I first inquired of Betsy Katz, what were you hoping to achieve by having this lecture series? Without hesitation, Betsy said, I just wanted my mother's name to live forever. And so it does. I can only hope that while Professor Katz is watching us from above, she feels the love that we have for her in this room and every day at Albany Law School. And it is for these reasons that Betsy and Michael started the Katheryn D. Katz Lecture Series at Albany Law, and we are so grateful for their generosity and their inspiration that have made tonight possible. So I do want to give a round of applause. Today marks 1 decade of this amazing annual series. I also want to thank others who made today possible, the Katz Awards Committee, Subcommittee, Professor Cheka, Professor Dodds, Dean Cruz, Persia Wilkins, Allie Van Stackelberg, Kristen Davis, Jeff Sieber. A million more thanks to Jeff Sieber, Lauren Minot, Megan Pearson, Sachi Vines, Tom Torello, Alex Peebles, Marcus Abad, and others in IA, headed by Jeff Shantz. Thank you to our wonderful law students, both from the Women's Law Caucus and Family Law Society, who have assisted us here today. Welcome, welcome. If Kathy were here today, and I truly believe she's here in spirit, she would be troubled by the threat of poor families that can be where the child welfare system is overly punitive. She would be concerned about its impact on mothers, on children, on families. For certain, she would want to have delved into Professor Guggenheim's work. In fact, she would have loved Marty. She would have loved his passion, his outrage at a system that has been horribly punitive to children and families, especially poor children and families of color. So I'm so delighted to introduce you to Marty tonight, who's also a dear friend of mine and has been a mentor of mine for almost 30 years, I counted. I'm younger, you're younger, I don't know. We're just gonna go with, it's been since the 90s, but that was a long time ago. I met Marty when I was a very, very young lawyer, starting out in New York City, working with Juvenile Rights Division. At some point, I started working with his clinic at the Juvenile Justice Clinic at NYU. where he had been on the faculty for almost 5 years, 5 decades rather. So he retired recently after almost 50 years at NYU Law. In true Marty fashion, he is bored and continues to want to come and serve and talk about his work. In fact, just last year, he was willing to look at one of my law review article drafts, and he was going to look at Professor Cheka's draft. So he wants to stay involved. He has been a mentor to so many people. He is truly beloved and a giant in his field. And when his retirement was announced, no one believed he would really stop working, and I think people were right. One sitting judge said, this is his calling. The true tribute to Marty is the lives of all of the children and families in New York. Another professor says Marty was a hero as a lawyer, framing one after another creative and brilliant challenges to the so-called child welfare system. He is known to be a mentor to many juvenile attorneys, parents attorneys, clinical law professors. He's known for his sharp wit, his unrelenting passion for justice. He pushes the envelope, and for good reason. Just last year, Marty won the Honorable Howard A. Levine Award for Excellence in Juvenile Justice and Child Welfare. The audience was filled with all of the Court of Appeals judges. Marty made true and provocative remarks about how we as a society would never accept the inherent racism and disrespect to clients in poverty in any other court than in family court. We wouldn't even accept it in traffic court, I believe he said. He ended his inspirational remarks asking the judges of the Court of Appeals to do something about it and to do better. And Chief Justice Rowan Wilson had great remarks in response. And I have no doubt that Marty's remarks today will be inspirational and provocative and make us want to get up and do something to right the injustices in our child welfare system. So thank you for being here. Come up to the podium.
So I can look at that picture and say, who is that guy? And then I can listen to Melissa and say, who is that guy? Thank you for those over-the-top remarks. Thank you, Dean, for your remarks and for welcoming me. And I look out at friends in the audience, Mary Lynch for so many years, Dale Cheka. I also want to acknowledge the executive director of the first interdisciplinary family defense office in the United States, Tara Coles, who is the executive director of the Center for Family Representation in New York, and an esteemed member of the Albany community, as I hope many of you know. I'll be provocative, I'm sure. I don't know how to be otherwise in light of the country that I live in. The United States has a problem. This country stands alone in the world of wealthy countries in its refusal to take the steps known to assure child well-being for all children. We are a member of the Organization for Economic Development and Cooperation, the OECD. And lucky for critics of the United States, the OECD keeps records. You can go on the Annie E. Casey Foundation annual list of well-being of children. You can go for many years, Marion Wright Edelman's website. You can't read those data and not feel sick. But the OECD isn't made up of advocates. It simply states the facts, and it ranks in the countries, the 40 countries that make it up. For family cash benefits, the United States ranks 39th out of 40. And let's understand that 1 is good. For public spending on family benefits, it ranks 37th out of 40. For public spending on education, it ranks 37th out of 40. For public spending on public benefits, 39th out of 40. Cash benefits and tax breaks for children, 0 to 5, 35th out of 40. Child poverty, 33 out of 40. Child poverty rate, 0 to, well, I don't know, 5th from the bottom. These are real facts. This isn't a campaign speech. It's undeniable that we should be ashamed of ourselves. The one fact I haven't mentioned, we are the wealthiest country in the world, not just of those 40, but by exponential differences. To be 37th out of 40 when you're the richest country in the group is much worse than to be 35th out of 40 when you're 30th in the country. That's in play. We're not in play. We are a world outlying pig in our refusal to share our wealth with people who are unable, without government assistance, to live out of poverty. Poverty is not an accident. There will surely be impoverished people, people living in poverty, in any community that isn't designed to mitigate poverty, to reduce its harmful impact, and to minimize the number of people who must endure an impoverished stage of their life. The negative consequences that flow from poverty are deep and wide, and any country that wants to pretend it cares about children could not imaginably behave as the United States does. Oddly enough, I'm not here to clarify how miserably we behave as a wealthy country. I just wanted to start with that. I want to clarify what we've done to hide our misdeeds and why and how the so-called child welfare system fits into this picture. For many reasons, but which at root is connected to our country's historical connection to slavery, American politics is organized around what is politely called rugged individualism. Within limits, when adults are unable to provide materially for themselves, this government only modestly comes to their aid. We live in a society that is unwilling, without titanic political fighting, to guarantee universal health care. A guaranteed income seems out of the question. And what would a country do that wants to have a place of stature in the world that has this aspect of its personality? if this is all we did, if this was all I could say about what's wrong with us, that would be plenty. But we don't stop there. In this country, it makes a great deal of difference to politicians and for Americans more generally to say to themselves and to others that they really do care about children and child well-being. Now, that's a hard trick to play. That's a difficult game to win. We, crappy Americans, really do care about children, our government tells us. You scratch your head and you say, how in the world can you make that fantastic claim? The evidence is obvious, indisputable. You don't. Oh, no, 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 we do. Here's how we do it. We've created a unique system that empowers caseworkers and judges to remove children from their families, to place them in state-sponsored foster care, and ultimately to destroy permanently the familial relationships. And we call it, here it comes, guys. We call it the child welfare system. Now, the word matter here because it's part of a propaganda game. Any system, any country that invests billions of dollars on a child welfare system has to be a country that cares about children's welfare. There's the rub. We do the one, but not the other. This is the American way. And I hope to demonstrate that it really is about propaganda. And we've done things like this before. I know Justice Jackson is the great alumnus of this law school. I assume I can say confidently the great, but if that goes too far, a great. And he wrote one of the most important opinions in the Supreme Court's lexicon, at least the one with the greatest rhetorical flourish. And I hope you are forced to read West Virginia School Board versus Barnett. But it was a propaganda decision. It wasn't a real decision. It was a statement to the world that any country that forces students to do this might be confused with some countries that force students to do this. This was the American flag salute in 1943. This was somebody else's. Students were expelled from school because they wouldn't do this. And Justice Jackson had to write an opinion that said, no, in America, you can't make anybody say the pledge. Now, any of you went to public school in the last 60 years in this country would know it's a daily ritual in every school, and no teacher ever told a student, you don't have to do it. In fact, I've never met a teacher who was told, you don't have to do it. Propaganda. Brown v. Board of Education. We're competing with the Soviet Union over segregation, over our claim to be the light in the universe. And so should we continue to be compared with the other USA that had apartheid formerly? We had apartheid formerly. The generals told Chief Justice Warren, it's not good for our image to have segregation. So they went from de jure segregation and de facto inequality. After San Antonio versus Rodriguez, we now have de facto segregation and de jure inequality. We allow wealthy communities to rig the system to ensure that their children will live a better life. They'll live longer, healthier, happier, wealthier because of the family into which they were born. Deliberately. I even want to suggest to our juvenile justice advocates that Roper versus Simmons was propaganda in its own way. We had trouble justifying being the one of only 2 countries on earth that would execute children. And judges all over the world would say to Justice Kennedy and embarrassed him, what kind of a horrible people are you? Oh, okay. It's 8th Amendment. You can put them in prison to die, but you can't kill them. Okay. I diverted. Now I want to defend the proposition that it's propaganda. I've staked the claim. The current system always stresses the vital importance of preventing a fatality caused by abuse in the child's home. No one, least of all me, should be heard suggesting that such tragedies are unimportant. But let us understand the politics behind picking that particular one as a public health leading problem that needs to be solved in the United States. First, we should be very clear it is not a leading public health problem. It lags far behind countless other public health problems. But to address those other things would be taking on lobbies and other factors that make it not worth doing. But if we target parents living in poverty, especially mothers living in poverty, no one's going to be too upset. There's nobody defending them. They don't have a voice. So we can make the claim they're the scary ones. They're the ones we need to tackle. And we've done such a good job of advancing the false claim that it is not just a leading public health problem, but the leading public health problem. That if you ask most judges or journalists or neighbors to name the leading cause of harm children face that deserves the attention of government, they'll tell you it's abuse suffered by children at the hands of their parent. They've succeeded in this machinery of propaganda to make to get people to believe that it's true. But what are the leading health risks children face? The odds of a child dying before the age of 18 are far higher in the United States than in any other high-income country, with firearms and motor vehicle accidents accounting for much of this exceptionally high mortality. Car crashes comprise 20% of all deaths American children suffer in a year. And firearm-related injuries comprise 15% of all deaths. 15% of children in the United States who die from guns. Is that a child welfare problem? I guess not. You know, because the NRA makes billions of dollars killing children. Politicians make billions get reelected allowing laws that ensure we will kill children. That's a government you want to entrust children to? The odds that a child living in the United States will be killed by a gun is 36 times higher than any other high-income country in the world. Who gets to call that something that has nothing to do with child welfare? Only people that don't mean it when they proclaim an interest in child well-being. Drownings in swimming pools are a far greater risk of death. 9 children a year will die in New York City from child abuse. That's not a number that's unimportant or irrelevant. I mean to say the lives lost are neither. But let's compare it against being a country that kills children 36 times more than any country with which we could be compared. 9 children a year in New York City. Should we not care about those children and those families? I actually think we should care about those children and those families. But we need to put things in context. I haven't begun to suggest how bad things really are, because the harms that we know children experience that I've identified so far are not harms that have been caused by government, only in the sense that government's failure to address them allows them to occur, but I don't count that as a cause. Maybe somebody in torts could say it's a causation. The cause is the person who shoots the gun, right? The government's failure to tame guns, they're a participant. But our government poisons children. It allows lead to be in water. It doctors the records when the feds come to check it out. New York City, Newark, Flint. We let children grow up in mold-infested homes, in lead-based paint homes. All you gotta do is remove it. We don't. Why? They're not our kids. And the landlords don't like it. And they're the ones that pay our donations. And all we want to do is be elected. We don't just permit harms to happen to children as a state. The state is a child. Now I'll use the word the way they use it when they confuse neglect with abuse. The state is a child abuser by its own definition, which is anybody who's doing something that adversely affects child well-being. This isn't a child welfare system. The name is propaganda. Language matters. And we do a disservice to ourselves and the community harmed by the system to allow it to continue to be known as the child welfare system. The use of that moniker serves as propaganda, masking the extent to which the country has consciously created and maintained conditions that harm children, and which the state has no intention to ameliorate. This is how we can go to international conferences and hold our head high. We've got a rock star child welfare system, folks. You should see it. We target communities every day. We have mandatory reporting requirements. If you see something, say something. Turn it over. We're the best in the world, say these fools, defending this malicious system not designed to advance child well-being, but to do something else. A reason to know it's not the child welfare system is that the definition of the kind of harm that children may experience is far too limited. Most of the things, as we've seen, that endanger children are not even included in this ambit. Indeed, all of the most dangerous risks to children's welfare in this country are outside the portfolio of the so-called child welfare administrators. They can't even investigate it. You can't have the commissioner of child welfare in New York City sue the mayor for maintaining public housing that's mold infested. You can't do it. He doesn't have jurisdiction. You can only sue the parent. I've had cases where my clients' children were removed from their home because of inadequate conditions in the home and placed in a city-run facility that was indistinguishable. That's not an exaggeration. That's the truth. And in our country, we've learned to cry when children are separated at the border. How can we not appreciate that the harm the individuals experience and suffer, parent, child, relative, is any different when we separate children at the border of Harlem, as Joyce McMillan likes to tell us we're doing? This is a system that only investigates what happens in the home. It is only a family regulation system. And I won't call this anything but that any longer. I allowed the title in this lecture to repudiate it, not to advance it. It's propaganda. If you use it, you're participating in it. Others call it the family policing system. Okay, I don't mind that. But I want to suggest we could also call it the family separation system. Because here's how it works. The federal government has a budget of approximately $10 billion that it gives out each year to the states. 90% of it is spent on foster care. I mean, when 90% of a system's budget is spent on removing children from their families and 10% is spent on keeping children at home, doesn't the name family separation system fit well? We might call it the family destruction system. And here's where we're really a leader in the world, in the most perverse sense. It also acts like, unlike any other country in the world, in this particular characteristic. It destroys families at an unprecedented rate. Since 1997, when Congress enacted the Adoption and Safe Families Act, states have terminated the parental rights, meaning the permanent destruction of the family, metronomically, based on a federal law that says after 15 months, it's time to pull the trigger. Pull the trigger. And more than 2 million families have been destroyed since that time. No country in the world behaves like us. About any given time, there are 125,000 children in foster care waiting to be adopted. And about 20,000 children a year age out of that system using a hideous bureaucratic. Imagine talking about your child saying, you aged out. Actually, when they age out, they're treated indistinguishably from prisoners who are released. They're given a bus ticket and a couple of $100. Good luck to you. The field of family regulation is the most important civil rights field nobody knows. It destroys tens of thousands of families each year. In New York City, more than 40% of Black and brown children's families are investigated before they turn 18, 40%. In a city where about 60% of children are Black and brown, they account for 90% of the children in the system. More than a third of all children living in the United States and more than half of all Black children living in the United States. Keep those numbers in your brain. Experience a family regulation investigation during their childhood. I'm guessing a few of you are astonished to absorb that idea because you have lived in privileged community all your life and you might not know anybody who's been targeted. And maybe you know, oh yeah, that one person that lives over there. In the communities in which many of us work, I guess few of us live, certainly I do not. In those communities, nobody doesn't know. Everybody knows. A Black child is more than 7 times more likely in any given year to have their parents' rights terminated. And will lose their lives in auto accidents. Think what it means to be a parent living in poverty in the United States. Not only do you have to endure an unacceptable standard of living compared with all other wealthy nations, a shockingly high infant mortality rate, and by the way, a maternal mortality rate. Well, that's not child welfare in the United States, right? That's just, oh, women. World outlying healthy lives differentials between people living in poverty and the rest of the community. Oh yeah, we're child well-being, which is not adult well. All right to die. All of that would be bad enough. Enough to create a movement for justice. I'm still waiting for that movement for justice outside of the small pockets where it's emerging. As we now appreciate how subordination is the result of stop and frisk and the power of the police to pull over any driver at any time of the day or night, something I have seen personally in my own life. Whenever I looked over, there was a non-white face that I saw all my life. But I didn't live in the communities that was doing this in the apartment. That led us to talk about living in a free society, driving while Black. But we continue to terrorize communities for parenting while Black. Is there a difference between the two? Both mean we live in a society in which simply going about one's business without fear is impossible. Both represent tyranny approaching its worst form. But one makes headlines out of which a movement is formed. We don't yet know where that movement, Driving While Black, will fully lead, but we're buoyed to participate in it, to see it. In this field, where state officials relentlessly terrorize communities, there's no outrage. There's practically no movement. And yet, consider these numbers. Well, I gave the numbers already, sorry. Imagine for the moment that we could achieve the goal of convincing all Americans to take responsibility for all children living in the United States. Imagine. In such a world, two consequences would be readily apparent. First, we would find ways to make substantial improvements to the quality of life of poor minority children and to ameliorate most of the currently unacceptable conditions they experience. The children will receive better health care and live in a cleaner, safer, healthier community. They and their families would be treated with dignity and respect by the myriad adults with whom they interact on a daily basis. That change alone would obviate the need for taking children out of their own communities and having them adopted into better ones. But even more crucially, once Americans started loving other people's children as their own, they would find repugnant and abhorrent a systematic strategy of taking children from their homes, permanently banishing their birth parents from their lives, and sending them to live with strangers. We need to stop harming these families. We need to reframe our understanding of government's role to ensure child well-being by providing families with the means and services all other wealthy democracies do. And while we're at it, to commit government resources to eliminating the known conditions that inflict incalculable and irreversible harm on children every day. When we do that, we'll be able to proclaim truthfully that we live in a society committed to child welfare. Thank you.
Did I tell you or did I tell you? So thank you for those provocative and fascinating remarks. And I think we have a little bit of time for questions. I'm looking at Jeff. Okay. And we have, I don't know if that's a wave or a question, Persia. Okay. Are there folks in the physical audience who have questions for Professor Guggenheim? Professor Cheka.
I was one of the few people who went to law school with a mission to work in this pilot knowledge system, because as you described, I grew up in a community that never heard of this, and then I happened to volunteer somewhere and I learned that I'm like, how can you all with this? Not my knowing, without my now kind of help. That said, I then went to law school for that, and then I leave, as you know, and I came up against a wall where I just felt that like the system was so great against the children that I represented in families that I didn't know, it was not what I imagined I could do, and I didn't really see a way out. Now, at the time, like Senator Teaching was beginning, and there was much more movement to help parents, but I think for young advocates, what can you advise them? Because to be honest with you, I now do other stuff that is in custody that is also works with underserved families, but the idea of the system being so rigged in a way really is frustrating for young advocates when we learn the tools of the law and then we get there and they're like, we are just do beholden to what social services, you know, police workers and judges and criminal hearings and all these things, all the stuff is there, and I just felt like I was a cog of the wheel of that.
So I could answer that on a number of levels. I'm going to give the extreme answer, and it isn't because I necessarily think people should act on it, but I do want us to appreciate that there are still other consequences to what I've said tonight, and one of them is what you're asking about. But you also remind me, Dale, that I meant to say, because I know you were a student of Jane Spinnick's, that Jane was last year's speaker, and she was my student in law school. So it's rare, as Jane said to me, that I get to follow in her footsteps, but tonight was a fun night for that opportunity. What I want to suggest in this horrible answer I'm now about to give, that among the consequences of this game that's being played is that we've conned a lot of good people to go into this field. And I want to make clear to anybody that goes into this field two things. One, you're doing it at the expense of what might be genuine child welfare advocacy, which is all upstream. The other is that when you are in this system, you're merely mitigating injustice. Now, merely mitigating injustice, there's a lot. It's like saying to a doctor without borders professional, you're merely wounding a person dying on the battlefield. Well, some of us don't think that's merely, but that's all you're doing in that world. You're putting Band-Aids on wounds. You're fighting for not justice, to mitigate injustice. For some of us, that's a career, but it's never going to get upstream. It's never going to fix what's wrong with this country.
On that same topic of how that does change it, right? And in terms of the perfect not being right? Have there been cases like this? We didn't overrule the system, right? It's just a case that attacked the child welfare system. And so are there times when law tries to, maybe it's effective, for some laws, for some cases, actually make some change?
Of course. I mean, Nicholson's an example, and there are many. 50,000 children were in foster care when I was working in the family courts in the 1980s. 7,000 are in foster care in New York City today. Tara's office is responsible for preventing the removal of 20 children a week. Maybe that number isn't accurate. Maybe it's less. Maybe it's more. We have created laws that make it ever less likely that a child will be removed than before. And those of us who are lawyers and want to be lawyers, that's what you do. I will say something, I don't know how to not be controversial. I don't like children's lawyers, and I don't think they help very much. And one of the things I don't like about having so many children's lawyers is we don't have enough parents' lawyers. And one thing I'll say for sure, if I say nothing else that I'm certain of, every child deserves to be represented by the best, to have their parent represented by the best lawyer in town. It's not important that every child be represented by the best lawyer in town, because the best child's lawyer can't win a case if the parent doesn't have a great lawyer. So if you're going to go into the field, be a family defender.
Thank you, Professor. That was a very interesting lecture. My question had to do with, because you mentioned how it's a problem with what your community can see when it comes to this issue. In my community, the only times I've really been aware of child removal as a concept and child protective services and all these agencies is unfortunately, there were a couple instances over the past decade of child sexual abuse in a number of families. And I was just wondering, even though this was something that you touched on in your lecture, number one, is that kind of a situation where like the housing you're mentioning with mold, where you're trying to get the kids out of mold, but then they wind up in mold as it is? Would you say that advocating for child removal in the instance of abuse is naive for that reason, because abuse is in the system? I'm ignorant, I don't know. And then the second thing I wanted to ask, and this is something like that people in my community were debating vigorously, because in a rural community, huge division. There are people who are like, oh, those kids need to get out of there. There are people who are like, oh no, we need to keep them together no matter what. In like a perfect world where the system is functioning perfectly, in your opinion, would you say like that form of abuse is a situation where removal is an appropriate last resort, or not part of the discussion? Or sorry, that's too broad.
One of the preeminent scholars in the field, when I was a recent graduate, was Joseph Goldstein at Yale Law School, and the author of, with Anna Freud and Albert Solnit, a series of books in the 70s that were preeminent in the field, before the best interest of the child, beyond the best interest of the child, in the best interest of the child. Oddly enough, Goldstein would say that's not a basis for intervention. I'm granting it's a basis for intervention, but who's being removed? As a police matter, you arrest somebody, and if you can't protect the putative victim, pendent lite, then you figure out a way to ensure, but removing a child, just the very idea of removal in our culture means you're bad. And children experience removal that way. And they're sexually abused in state care at a shockingly high rate. I mean, at such a high rate, I used to go to Hudson Training School for girls to visit, a place where if you read The Lost Children of Wilder and hear Shirley's journey, the state abuses children every day. So it's not a panacea to remove a child from that home. But if you're asking me, is that an appropriate basis for coercive intervention? Of course.
Overwhelming. As a non-traditional student, coming here, I have the intention that I wanted to read down law, still want to read down law. I found it helpful because I've been parents, because I always think about children. But now I also find, okay, so we're downstream, we're not getting upstream, that's the job I take, but I'm going to have to because I have to. The sense of overwhelm, even writing my paper right now, of all the things that I could get behind. What would you say is something I can start while I'm just floating downstream with the current things against me, paying my bills? What else can I dabble with to just start?
So I do want you to appreciate, you're asking an existential question. And I'm sounding so bold and confident here, right? I want you to appreciate I've done nothing to improve the world. I haven't eliminated poverty by $1. I haven't even tried. I've identified it as a crucial thing to do. But I'm a lawyer. I'm a defense lawyer. And I can mitigate injustice. So at the broadest level, at the end of your life, if you want to have had that arc of justice turned so far that you can look around and say, I like what I see, God bless. I'm near the end of my life. I don't look around and say, I like what I see. I hate what I see. I do almost nothing to stop it because my skills are defending people. My rhetoric is something else. I don't know how you can be better than me in making this a more just world. I haven't done enough.
think a lot of people understand the power of corporate lobbying in that in corporate context, but is there a lobby on the other side of this issue? Is there a pro removal lobby that would stop, the chair of the Assembly Committee and the chair of the Senate Committee from deciding to fix things?
There are multiple lobbies. There are pro-adoption lobbies. There are, but there also are local government profits handsomely from this. They steal money from the children in foster care. They steal Social Security benefits. They steal disability benefits. They steal death benefits. When a bill was enacted, was proposed to eliminate it, the Children's Defense Fund opposed the elimination of the bill. You can't believe this stuff. Richard Wexler calls it the child welfare industrial complex. It is a multi-billion-dollar business. And it isn't just for adoption, it's for a lot of employees. New York City is a gigantic employer of the child welfare industrial complex. And we don't spend money on families, we spend money on professionals that pay attention to families.
If there's anything in Zoom, do any folks in Zoom have a question? Okay. Well, thank you very much. So much to ponder. Just, yeah, a lot of food for thought. On a just logistical point of view, I just want to let you know that we have a couple of exciting days coming up. If you enjoyed this lecture, there are some other lectures that should be on your calendar. Kate Stoneman Day will be March 26, 2025. And we've already secured our 11th Katz lecture for 2025, Solange Maldonado, for October 16th. So for those of you like me who like to plan like years ahead, which I get made fun of all the time, you can go ahead and put those on your calendar. But there's been so much food for thought and so much to think about. It's going to take a while for it to sink in, I think, right? Yes, the SILS lecture is November 14th. The amazing Professor Naomi Khan will be speaking as well. Pardon me? And they have a book roundtable, which is going to be with Bridget Crawford, Naomi, and who's the third author? Emily Waldman. And it's about, and they just came out with this terrific book called Hot Flash. Is it called Hot Flash? And it's basically about how society does not address postmenopausal issues. So that's going to be really great food for thought. So yeah, if you just kind of hang out in DAMC, you're bound to be educated by some really amazing people. No, but we have some great scholars here. So we want to thank you so much for imparting all of your wisdom and your thoughts. And with all of that, we then want to celebrate you and we have some wine and food down in the East Foyer. And I hope that we'll have a chance to have students meet you and other folks meet you. For those on Zoom, I apologize. You'll have to get your own glass of wine. That wasn't part of the program here. But thank you for joining us. And thank you so much, Marty, for all you do.